When Avid came out with the Symphony, which was purely designed for finishing shows, I was the person they grabbed to put in to work on it. And for some reason, it just clicked for me. Everything just made sense.
In this episode, I talk with Terence Curren, a colorist and online editor in Los Angeles. He's known for unscripted television shows like Project Runway, True Life, Ghost Hunters, and many others. He got his start at the well-known post-facility Matchframe Video as employee number 1. At Matchframe, he was one of the first editors in LA to work with Avid Media Composer, Symphony, and DS. And to this day, he still colors and finishes shows on a Symphony. In 2002, after 16 years at Matchframe, he moved on to starting his own company, Alphadogs. Many LA post-production professionals are familiar with Alphadogs from their monthly meetups called the Editor's Lounge. It's been a hub for people to learn about new technologies, directly ask vendors questions, and socialize with other pros. It's been a great resource for over 13 years, and I've personally learned a ton from attending them. In this interview, we talk about how his start in editing affects his approach to color, running his own business from a colorist's perspective, and using an Avid in color workflows, and why they can save time. We're still running our raffle of scope box with Divergent Media. If you still want to submit your still and matching scope view, it's going on until October 30th, 2016. For more details, go to facebook.com/coloristpodcast or twitter.com/coloristpodcast. We'll announce the winner on the following podcast. And now, here's Terry Curren. Hi, Terry. Thank you very much for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Josh.
So how did you originally become a colorist?
I started in film production originally and ended up gravitating into post just sort of sideways like everybody does. I was a linear editor. I was doing the finishing in the linear bays. And so there was minor color correction. I mean, you were just doing basic, what you could do with a time-based corrector, which is hue, black, and your white, your gain. So that was for years. Then Avid came out with, first Avid introduced the Media Composer, and I was one of the few that would play around on it when we got one at the company I was at. And then I took a couple of the classes and was like, okay, I understand it, but I was still primarily a linear editor and doing a lot of finishing in there also. So when Avid came out with the Symphony, which was purely designed for finishing shows, I was the person they grabbed to put in to work on it. And for some reason, it just clicked for me. Everything just made sense. I think a combination, I know a lot of the linear guys had a hard time with going to Avid because they didn't edit that way, but having edited in film originally, it all made sense to me how it worked.
A lot of colorists come up from telecine or their tape ops, and they go in that direction. But how do you think starting as an editor helped you become a better colorist?
It's interesting because I had, first is the background in storytelling. So I understand how a lot of different elements affect story. And so understanding the concept of how color can affect story came pretty naturally. Having the years of knowing how to read scopes and making sure everything was technically correct, which is what we were doing, in a linear bay finishing, and getting things to match. It was very difficult delivering shows to networks prior to, I don't know, maybe about 94, 95, because they would reject for any problem. And so you had to be perfect when you delivered a show. And I think the beginning of the change on that was America's Funniest Home Videos, because they got a waiver for using all the crappy VHS and stuff from home video. That, it was sort of a slow decline since then. And now it's pretty much, is there a picture there? Sort of. Yeah. Okay. We'll air it. I had that experience, but I also had the benefit of, because of the post house I was working at also had telecine. So I could go to the colorist and go, hey, I'm working on the Symphony and it has color correction tools. Come check it out. They'd come in and I'd show them how to play around, and then they'd show me how they worked. And, I got a lot of cross-pollination learning there. And prior to that, the only way you learned how to do color correction was to get into the telecine department as an intern or whatever, and then eventually an assistant, and then you'll get to do dailies at some point. And eventually, if you were good enough, then you could work your way up to colorist. So there were very few people doing it. Those bays cost $1 million a piece. So there were very few opportunities to even get in there and do that. And the guys who were there, who were making big dollars, were not inclined to just show everybody how to do it. because they were kind of in control of fiefdom. So everything was sort of a black art, and it was hard to learn about color correction. That's why I was lucky being in the situation I was at, that I could learn about it. And all of that kind of changed when Steve Holfish wrote his book on color correction, because it sort of exposed the dark art to the general public. There was a landmark shift, that, and then having the tools available in the Symphony, which, of course, at that time, the first Symphonies were like $350,000. But as you know now, you can get Resolve for free.
Yes, now you get the Symphony option.
Yeah, you get Symphony option. Color correction tool-wise, you can get Resolve. I mean, those bays that those colorists were working in that cost $1 million were Da Vinci bays. To go from $1 million to free in the space of 10 years is pretty impressive. Not for the company, but from the end user point of view.
Yeah, you worked on one of the very first symphonies that were in LA, and you've been on it since each of these iterations that it's gone through, too. I mean, what keeps you on that platform for so long?
The number of clients that we have that edit on Media Composer. The beauty of the Symphony is it's Media Composer with more tools. So the offline editor has done all the stuff they're going to do, and then boom, they're done, and then they turn it over, and I'm starting where they left off. I'm not starting with, okay, how do I conform this and get it into whatever thing I'm on, and try to figure out how do I make this effect look like what they did in offline and all of that. I can start right where they left off and move forward from that point. And that's a huge time saving that people don't realize until they start doing, crossing platforms with various projects. Even something that's pretty tightly integrated, like Apple's Color was with Final Cut Pro. By the end, it was pretty tightly integrated. Even that, there were lots of little gotchas, and you had to learn how to work around those gotchas. Replacing stills in the timeline before you went to color, things like that. There's always stuff that just doesn't quite work right, and you have to learn how to work around it. That's not there. In Symphony, you open it up, you're in Media Composer with more tools. So, boom.
Color, little things like audio.
Yeah. Exactly. And Resolve, Resolve is working towards that. The beauty of Resolve is that they're making it sort of an editor. I mean, they're getting there. And the nice part of that is that regardless of where somebody offlines, whether it's Media Composer or Premiere or Final Cut, you can go into Resolve, and if it's an editor and it has all the tools there, you never have to go back. And that takes out a huge chunk of the battle. When we talk about the round trip, it's the problem of going into the other program and then coming back from the other program. And you introduce problems both ways that you have to know how to work around, et cetera, et cetera.
The tools in Symphony, did they shape the way that you grade? I mean, they're limited by, what you can and can't do, but sometimes that's not necessarily a bad thing.
No, it's not. And the big advantage that Symphony had from the beginning, and still has actually, is what they call the relational color correction. And what that is that you can, when you're coloring a clip in the timeline, you can have it apply that color correction just to that clip, or you can have it apply that color correction to every other clip that is from the same master clip, or you can have it apply that color correction to every other clip that is the same source clip name, or you can have it apply it to every other clip that is by the same tape name. And hopefully someday, if they get their crap together, which is highly suspect, they'll have every clip by the same original file name, source file name.
That would be great.
That's how the tape used to work. It was great. Somebody would shoot an interview, and of course, tape 1 and 2 and 3 of the interview, they're all exactly the same because they lock it down and everything's the same. You correct it once, and boom, it's throughout the show. It's done. And as soon as you do that one shot, it's done. And so that gives an amazing amount of speed boost in the overall color correction. Whereas in something like a Resolve, et cetera, where if you have a panel, you can color a shot much faster than you can an individual shot in Symphony. But because of the relational color correction in Symphony, you can get the overall project done faster, depending on how it's set up originally.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of the panel, too, Avid bought Euphonics back in 2010. They took over the MC Color panel. Do you use it?
We do have it. We'll use it with Resolve, or you can use it with Baselight. It doesn't work well with Symphony, of course, because it's Avid's product, right? I pinpointed exactly what the problem was and pointed it out to basically everyone at Avid. So they all know about it, and they've chosen not to put the resources into fixing it for whatever reason. It's a granularity issue in interfacing with the Symphony. So let's say, for instance, I can move the hue wheel with the color panel or with a mouse or whatever. And let's say, there's access point numbers. So let's say I can move it from 5.3 and I move it the slightest amount that I possibly can, and it goes to 5.7. I move it back, it goes to 5.3, and I move it up, it goes 5.7. But I can actually type in 5.6, and it'll go there. The Symphony software itself is capable of doing it. The interface with external controls is not. It's very coarse. And so using a panel with that is pretty much useless. It drives you crazy.
In your opinion, why didn't DS really take off as a finishing tool? People are still using Symphony, and at the end of DS's lifespan, they kind of started to have better crosstalk between them. But what happened with it?
You have to go back into the history of it. And DS was the digital studio. It was the finishing platform of a company called Softimage. And Softimage was a Microsoft company. Basically, Microsoft built it to get into the video universe. And they were going to be bought by Sony. And Avid had Symphony, and Symphony was their finishing platform, and that market was starting to really grow. And, they want to protect that market, obviously. And a friend of mine was actually flying to Florida to do demonstration. He worked for Sony. He was being flown by Sony to Florida to do demonstrations at this big launch event where he was going to show how to use the DS, the new Sony DS. And he lands and he got paged. This is back when you had pagers, not cell phones. He gets paged, then he calls in and they go, get on the next flight coming back. It's like, what happened? Avid bought him. So Avid bought Softimage to prevent Sony from having that finishing solution. Now you're already starting with, okay, now Avid's got two finishing solutions. So which one do they throw resources at? And they never figured out how to, which way to go with the whole thing. So they sort of, they have the Softimage guys up in Canada working on their thing. And then they have the guys down here in Massachusetts working on Symphony. And instead of coordinating like one company, they really kind of operated as two companies separately. And that's an amazing amount of wasted resources. But eventually they go, well, once they had to go to HD, the easiest way to go to HD is on the DS because it's sort of resolution independent. It'll be easy to jump there. To do that in Symphony land would have been a nightmare. So they decided, all right, well, DS is going to be our HD finishing solution. So now they have to figure out how to get Media Composer projects into DS. And that is where the shit hit the fan and things really went south. And they worked on it. When you talk about even towards the end, they're going, well, they're getting closer. And it's that same thing I started out talking about earlier, where if you have to go out to another program and things don't come across and you have to know how to prep your sequences so that you eliminate things that won't, all that kind of stuff, that doesn't work when you can just open it up in Symphony and there it is. So once Avid finally buckled and said, all right, we're going to make Symphony HD also, it was over for DS, because why would you go to a DS when you can go into Symphony? It opens up and everything's there. Yes, DS had more powerful finishing tools, but for the day-to-day grinded out stuff, if you can't quite do the same level of finishing as you can in a DS, but you can get in and out of it a lot faster because of the interchange is perfect, guess who wins? And you couldn't come back. That was the thing. You went to DS. They made a path to go to DS. They didn't make a path to come back, which is fine if you're just going to DS and that's the end of the line. But if you've got production companies who want the finished project so that they can make changes on it later on if they decide to, and now it's in DS, they can't open it in their media composers, what good is that? So there's a lot of problems with the overall thing. And so the market decided for Avid, okay, we're staying with Symphony and we don't care about DS. And eventually Avid just had to say, all right, well, we can't pump any more dollars down there.
I mean, for you, it almost seems like the Baselight plugin is the best of both worlds. You get all of the tools that you have in something like Resolve, but you're still within Symphony. But there's still some issues with it. What do you think still needs to happen to make it a viable contender?
Avid thinks instead of spending money on R&D and improving our product, we'll just ask third parties to do it, right? So instead of fixing the color corrector or improving the color corrector, they're saying, oh, well, we're going to integrate Baselight tighter. Well, you can't completely integrate it. When I'm in the Symphony and I'm going along and I'm finishing a show, I'm not only color correcting. I may be asked to trim a shot. I may find an effect that's funky and I fix it. There's all kinds of things that can happen while I'm working on it because I'm doing the whole finishing cycle. I'm not doing just purely color. That's a simple thing to do in Symphony. With a plugin, I'm popping out into another interface, and now I'm out there working. So it's not as bad as going out completely to an external application, but you are going to an external application within the plugin. So I'm in there color correcting, and I go, well, let me compare this to a shot 3 minutes later. Well, I got to go out of that and go back into Symphony, go down. And how do I do those next to each other? But when I'm in Symphony, the Symphony color corrector, I can scroll down a timeline somewhere, grab a shot. I can take a reference of it up there and put it up in the monitor and come back down to the shot I was working on. And I can compare them, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very simple workflow. Everything is fluid. It's easy to swap between. Oh, let me trim that. Oh, I just found a flash frame. Let me fix that real quick before I move on. But when you're going out to a plugin interface to do something, you're kind of on an island, so it's not as fluid. For us, the Baselight plugin is kind of all right, I'm doing the color correction in Symphony. Most of it's simple to do. I got a couple shots that are a real problem. That's where Baselight's helpful. But as to use just sort of the general workflow to do color correction in a Symphony, no, it doesn't. It really doesn't make sense.
It would only make sense maybe if you had a full Baselight there and you could do somebody else was doing the color and somebody else was doing the online. So you could send AAFs over and they are completely live within Symphony at that point.
Right. But then you're going out to the Baselight and then you're coming back in. Just like you could go out to the Resolve and come back in, except for Resolve is free and Baselight's what, $140 or something? Or you can get the $995 full model of Resolve. It's still not $140 that Baselight is. So you can put together a beefed up, kick-ass computer with 3 GPUs and an extension chassis, et cetera, and still come out at maybe 15 grand versus the 140 grand. And you can have a kick-ass Resolve or you can have Baselight. For all but a few places, it makes no sense to try to go that route. I hate to say that because I like the Baselight guys. I mean, the Filmlight is really good, but I'm just looking at the marketplace and I'm an end user and, I have to make the bottom line work in my facility. And that's based on what clients are willing to pay these days. And, it all works backwards. So if it was up to me, we'd still have full-blown Da Vinci bays,
And charge for them the same way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you can charge $900 an hour for a color correction room, I have no problem paying for all the hardware.
Yeah. So if Symphony was to vaporize today, what would you use?
Well, it depends on the clients again. Because we're primarily a finishing house, we have to go with the flow of what our clients are using. When we started out back in 2002, it was all Avid. And that was it. And I had friends who were using Final Cut, and I thought, this has got the potential of being something, and we should at least learn it so we know it and figure out how we can deal with it if it comes up. By 2004 or 5 or something like that, there were basically 3 post houses in LA where you could get your Final Cut projects finished. It was us, Plaster City, and Digital Film Tree. That became a huge, as you know, the market changed quite a bit. By 2007, about 75% of our finishing work came from Final Cut. So we were doing it in color because that made the most sense. And then Final Cut 10 came out, and guess what? Now we're back to almost all Avid again. So there you go.
When you left Matchframe, you ended up starting Alphadogs. So what made you decide to start your own business rather than join another facility?
I wasn't looking to join a facility at that point. What happened was the Avid Symphony came out. It was mid-90s. And I'm working in the Avid Symphony, but I'm just looking at the overall situation. And I know that computers get faster and cheaper every year. It's very simple for me to see that. And at this point, you have to flash back to then. Avid Symphony was the first to put uncompressed standard definition video into a computer. That was a big thing. Whoa. But I'm looking at that going, well, that just means that within a short amount of time, the people's computers at home are going to be able to handle standard definition uncompressed video. So it's just a matter of time before everybody can edit at home. And the business model at that point in the facilities, and still in some of them, is based on, well, we have the gear, so you have to come to us and pay whatever we ask for. And I'm looking at this going, this is not going to last because everybody's going to have the tools. So I could see what was going to happen to the industry. And to try to figure out how that would play out, I like to look at historical models. So I thought back to desktop publishing. And if you're not familiar with that, I'll take you in the Wayback Machine to the 80s. I was working at my dad's lock shop back in the 70s. And if I wanted to make a flyer to mail out to people's homes saying, hey, come down here, we'll cut your keys, discount, whatever, you would go to a print shop. They had artists in there and you would tell the artist what you want it to be and and you're paying for that. And they'd come out with a mock-up for you and you go, well, then change this, change that or whatever. And then you pay again. And it was very expensive. And then when you got it locked down, then they made an actual master from that. And that's what they ran the flyers off of. Very expensive process. And then the Mac comes out and then desktop publishing. And all of a sudden it was like, whoa, I don't need to go there anymore. I can make the flyer myself on my home computer, print it out on a laser printer and make copies. Boom, I'm done. It destroyed the business. And when I'm looking at this in the mid-90s, there's no print shops left, really. I mean, maybe one in every town instead of one on every 5 blocks. But there were still Kinkos where you could go in and print your own stuff out. But what happened at that point is if you wanted to make a flyer for your kid's birthday, you'd do it yourself. Today, it's still the same thing. If you're going to make a flyer for your kid's birthday, well, actually, now you would make a PDF and send it. But at that point, if you make a flyer, you would do it yourself. But if you wanted to make a brochure for your business, you're going to hire a graphic artist. And so what I realized from that is that the graphic artists were still working all along. Those guys were always working because they had a skill set that wasn't easily replaced by computers. And myself, as an editor and a colorist, that meant I would always be working. That's not going to be a problem. But the facilities, the guys who lived off of renting the gear, they're toast. And so when I saw that, I was going, okay, what's the new model going to be? And I didn't actually plan on having a post house, so to speak. I just wanted to buy a Symphony. I wanted actually 4-wall a room at Matchframe, buy a Symphony and put it in there and just have them say, pretend like I was just part of the company. But they wouldn't go for that. They're, oh, no, we'll never do that. We'll never do that. Of course, they did end up doing it with other people later on. It became a thing where I had one of my main clients she'd been for years saying, you need to go somewhere. You need to go to another post house. These guys are problems. So I knew she would follow me wherever I went. And so I said, look, if I buy my Symphony, would you be willing to, take a chance on me? She said, oh, sure. So that began the planning. And then the problem becomes because we were doing television. If you have a system and it crashes or whatever, breaks, for whatever reason, it's not like I could turn around to my client and go, well, you're not going to make air this week. So it meant if I'm going to have a system that I'm cutting television shows on a deadline, I got to have a backup of everything. So I got to have 2 systems. I got to have 2 decks. I've got to have 2, et cetera, down the line. That just sort of ended up blossoming eventually into what Alphadogs became. But the difference is that we've always focused on, we provide the talent, we'll get your show done. We'll get it done the best price we can without sacrificing quality. So my job as a facility owner is to always be looking at how can I reduce costs? How can I make things more efficient, et cetera, without sacrificing quality? That's the big challenge on a daily basis. I mean, you can go out and you can shoot on a GoPro and you can edit on, and it's going to look like crap. So there's a point where you've just gone too far and you've sacrificed quality. We can't go that far, but we've got to keep expenses as low as we can. So that's the challenge of the 21st century, I guess.
Running a business requires a much different skill than being a colorist, right? So what do you know now that you wish you knew when you started?
It's funny. I really knew where the industry was going to be now. And we were positioned to do that all the way along to get to here. What I don't know is where things are going to be 10 years from now. And I've always been really good about predicting, roughly at least the future. It's completely unpredictable. There's no business model for where we're at. There's no historical model for where we're at. We're in a really unique time in human history. I don't know how things are going to play out, to be honest. So yeah, if I was going to do things differently, I probably would have invested in real estate.
Yeah, it's kind of scary because your predictions have been pretty spot on. For you to say who knows where it's going to go? It's that means that we're going into unknown territory.
It's so bizarre. As an artist, you can go, okay, well, what historically have artists been? Artists have been historically starving artists. That's where that term comes from. If you were a performing artist, you would travel from town to town and try to get enough doing shows to get meals, etc. That is most of the history of mankind. Unless you were lucky enough to land a benefactor who would, pay to support you, you were going to be a starving artist. And what changed was film. When all of a sudden they could capture somebody's performance and then distribute it all around the world, instead of just going to a town and getting $1 for your performance, you could get $1 for your performance times hundreds or thousands of times, and you didn't have to be there, which is not possible before. And because film and distribution, all that was so expensive, it was a very tightly limited thing to do, and that kept the costs up there. And because there was so much money in it, everybody could make money, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now we're kind of back to where you started, because anybody can make a product and they can distribute it to the rest of the world via YouTube or whatever. So you're only limited by your creativity and willingness to do something. And we're kind of heading back towards that. And you see it all around with the people who are working less, the people who are making less money, we're heading back to the starving artist type scenario. There used to be 3 networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, right? Whatever amount of advertising dollars went into those networks, it's not like now that there's 1,000 or 1,000,000 times more outlets that there's 1,000,000 times more advertising dollars. They're not.
As you had touched on before, it's really inexpensive to purchase a color grading system. Was this good or bad for the industry in general?
It's bad for if you talk about the industry as the people making money, it's bad for them. It's bad for us, you and I. Is it bad in overall? No, it's great. There's nothing wrong with giving people more creative tools. It's only going to pay off well in the long run for humanity in general. But for people making a living, yeah, it's bad for us. And the worst part is we only have ourselves to blame, because what you and I bring to color correction is the years of experience. And it's easy to go, oh, yeah, that just means you've been doing it. Yeah, well, we have been doing it. We've made the mistakes that other people will have to make already. We've figured out how to work around them. We've figured out how to solve tons of problems. All of that is part of our toolkit. So when we walk in, we go, okay, we can fix this, no problem. Somebody else has to come in and fart around for hours and hours and hours and hours. Okay, if they're making, $10 an hour and we're making 50, then, and it takes them 10 times as long, guess what? The client just got screwed. But that is the reality of, dropping the price of the tools. So the big problem is that we have failed as an industry to educate the consumer, the end user, the viewer, into the value that we add. Nobody at home knows what a colorist does. They have no idea. They're sitting there and they're watching TV on cable, and somebody's in an interview and they are a little bit green in this shot, and the next time they're in the exact same interview, they're a little bit purple. They don't notice because they don't know that that's horrible. Maybe they like some shows better than others because of how the color impacts them, but they don't know that. They have no awareness of it. Not any more than I could tell you the difference between 2 really good painters. I couldn't tell you which one was better or worse. I have no idea. That's not my skill set. I don't have the education in it. And so I just look at something and go, well, I like it or I don't. That's how I judge art. That's not really fair to the people who have the experience, because if I'd come up as an artist, I'd be able to look and go, oh, we've screwed ourselves, because if the consumer doesn't care about the color correction, why should you get paid for it?
Yeah, that's a good point. They just formed the Color Society International. One of the main goals of that is to educate people, to make sure that people get awards for being colorists and that people are educated, and many other things that they're doing. What are your thoughts about some sort of an organization for colorists?
I have a membership in that, and that's great for us within our trade. It's like another trade organization. That doesn't speak to the end consumer. That doesn't educate the end consumer. I identified this problem and was trying to figure out what could I do about it. And so I've made a couple videos that I tried to make pretty down to earth and interesting and short to grab anybody. So you can show it to anybody and it goes, oh, why do you need color correction? Well, here you go. How does color correction add to storytelling? Well, here you go. I tried to design them to be able to show to just the average person, and they can go, oh, I didn't know that. Because my goal is to get them, if they're watching TV and they go, those interviews didn't match, we've won. We've won. At that point, you and I will work forever and we'll be taken care of. If we don't, then we're going the other direction. And you can see this. There's a perfect example of it in literature. Anybody on the planet, almost 99.9% of the people on the planet can afford a pencil and paper. How many great writers are there? How many writers are there making money at, a decent living writing? Not that many, but they're out there. I could hand anybody, I don't care who it is, I could go to anybody and I can hand them a paper written by a college graduate, and I can hand them a paper written by a second grader, and anybody could tell you the difference. They read them and go, okay, they may not be able to get into the fine details, but they can immediately tell the difference. Why? Because we're all educated to read and write from the time we're, born, basically, when our parents are reading fairy tales to us or whatever. All the way through our life, we're educated on that. And so we can tell when something's better or worse. We may not know why or be able to explain how, but we can tell. That's the level I would love to get to with editing and color correction and cinematography and sound, so that people can just go, I know that's wrong. And then we're covered. But how do we get there? I don't know. You tell me.
Well, part of it is not being listed after the greenskeeper, after the craft service and all of that, too. I mean, those people all contribute to a film. They don't make the same contribution at the very end of a film that a colorist does.
No, that's true. Different people have different influences on it. Editors is classic because editors are really the silent final rewrite of the script. And the old saying is, if they can see your editing, you failed. As an editor, you're screwed starting out the gate. You can't win if you want recognition.
Here in LA, you do the monthly Editors Lounge meetup at Alphadogs. And, I just want to personally say thanks for putting those on as well, because I know it takes a lot of effort, and I've learned a ton of stuff just by going to those. So thanks for putting them on. But I'd really like to know how it started, like why you decided to do that.
That's a good question. Back when I was at Matchframe Video, I kept trying to get them to have sort of a gathering for editors. And I just said, at that time in LA, there was like a Grass Valley editors user group, and I think there was an Avid users group, et cetera. And I thought, well, that's kind of silly. What about the fact that we just edit? And so I was pushing them to just have an editors meetup, where editors can come over, hang out and whatnot. And they would never go for it. So when I actually started Alphadogs, and we're sitting there one night, I was going, hey, wait, I could do that here. What the heck? Just have some people come over. So I called a bunch of editors and said, hey, come on over Friday night, we'll hang out, And the first Editors Lounge meeting was 8 editors sitting in a circle, drinking beer and having a good time. And that was cool. And then after the second one of those, I said, hey, what would you guys like in one of these? And pretty much everybody wanted to be able to learn stuff from the manufacturers. And so I started calling around to different manufacturers and, trying to get somebody to come out and present to us. And I finally got Boris Effects to come out and do it. So thank you, Boris, again. They came out, and it was great. It was like pulling teeth to get people to come out. They came out. Everybody loved it. And now it's at the point where we're constantly contacted by manufacturers going, hey, can we come out and present our stuff? Can we show you, da-da-da-da. But it really was kind of a give back, because I was raised that way. When I started Alphadogs, I also had internship programs that we still have to this day. I taught at Pasadena City College for a while. I was a scoutmaster for years. It's just part of, you give back. You got to give back. So all those people who helped me on the way up, I'm doing the same thing. I'm giving back as much as I can. And the cool thing about Editors Lounge, I get to hang out and party with a bunch of editors and have a good time.
Yeah, absolutely. They're always a good time.
Well, thank you.
Well, thanks, Terry, for coming onto the podcast. I really appreciate it. If anybody wants to get in contact with you, how can they reach you?
Alphadogs.tv, editorslounge.com, Terry at alphadogs.tv, or call Alphadogs, or whatever, or come to Editors Lounge.
There you go. Cool. Thanks, Terry.
All right. Thanks a lot, Josh.